Hello and welcome to the Gamers Tavern episode 18. You know, I started off this episode kind of in panic mode, and there was a good reason for that. I was registering for Gen Con, and as you probably know, Gen Con registration has come and gone, and I have been approved, and I did get my room downtown. So, for all 6 days, 5 nights. So I'm pretty happy about that. However, I just wanted to say something about my reaction on there. When I was listening to it back, I'm like, oh my god, I did no processing. I didn't speed things up. I didn't change anything. That was literally how freaked out I was before the housing and before registration. So, yeah. Anyway, this week's episode we have Jason Marker on as our guest, and we're talking about giant robots beating the piss out of each other. How is that not fun? So, anyway, I would actually like you to listen to our sponsors this week if you're one of the people who kind of skips ahead a little bit, because we have a bit of a special announcement coming up. So go ahead, grab a drink from the bar, and take a seat at the table in the corner, and our special announcement will come directly after this word from our sponsor. Hello gamers, I'm Daryl Mott Jr. from Anacle News Tabletop and the Gamers Tavern podcast, which you probably know because I'm betting I was just talking a second ago. I'm sure you already know about DriveThru RPG, as it is the biggest repository for digital copies of your favorite games. Dungeons & Dragons, Shadowrun, BattleTech, World of Darkness, Numenera, Fate, and so many more. And sometimes there are pennies on the dollar because, face it, PDFs can sometimes be so much more convenient than print copies, but if you need print copies, they sell those too. So if you want to support the Gamers Tavern podcast, click on the affiliate links in the show notes and check out DriveThru RPG. Gamers Tavern has doubled its listeners in the month of January, so we want to thank you, our loyal fans, for spreading the word. And how are we going to do that? By holding a contest. What do you win? Well, let's start off with a signed copy of Gamers Tavern Award winner for Best Campaign Setting, Accursed, the Dark Fantasy Savage World campaign where you play the monsters cursed by witches in a land of upheaval from Meliorvia. Next, we have a signed copy of Dementalism, a game of ingenious ingeniousness where you test your memory and unlock special gifts from the insane world of Lowlife from Mother Oath Creations. Oh, we have more. How about a signed copy of Better Angels, a game of supervillainy where you have been tempted by the powers of evil to become a supervillain fighting the heroes from Arc Dream Publications. Then we have Con on the Cob, a celebration of games, art, freaks, and fun from October 16th through the 19th in Hudson, Ohio. You get a voucher good for 1 free admission with the purchase of 1 adult admission. And to top all of this off, you also get a free iPod Shuffle, courtesy of Gamers Tavern, preloaded with the latest episodes of the podcast. So, what do you have to do to win this fabulous package? Well, our gruff tavern keeper has insisted that he be involved. So, all you have to do is send an email to contest@gamerstavern.org with the subject line, Mac Sent Me, with a body including your name, your full mailing address, and your suggestions for how we can make Gamers Tavern even better in the future. This contest is limited to residents of the United States of America and only 1 entry per person or household. Full rules are available at gamerstavern.org/contest. Once again, the email address for the contest is contest@gamerstavern.org with the subject Mac Sent Me. Get your entry in by midnight Central Time on March 10th for your chance to win the entire package.
Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Gamers Tavern. I'm your host, Ross Watson.
And I'm Daryl Mott Jr.
And tonight we have with us a returning guest, Jason Marker.
Hey, guys.
Now, you may have heard Jason on the show before, but we're just going to ask him for a really brief rundown of his gaming character sheet so the listeners know who he is and where they can find him on the web.
Okay. Thanks for having me on, guys. My name's Jason Marker. I'm a freelance game writer and designer from Detroit. My history in the business, well, I've been playing games for almost 30 years now. My history in the business started in 1999 when I was first published by Palladium Books in the Rifter. Over that time, I freelanced for Palladium for a while. In 2007, I was hired on full-time as a staff writer, and in my tenure at Palladium, I brought the new Robotech RPG back to market. Since parting with Palladium Books in 2009, I've been mostly with Fantasy Flight Games, working on all of the Warhammer 40k games, as well as the new Star Wars RPG. Aside from that, I did Accursed with Ross. I've done a few other things. I can't remember off the top of my head. A little bit of Shadowrun 4. I work on my own stuff.
Awesome. Actually, we were just talking before the show about Accursed because the books are now out. And
yes.
I took my copy around to ChupacabraCon last weekend. And
oh, yeah?
Yeah.
How'd they like it?
Everybody seemed to say that they thought it was awesome and the artwork looked really great. I got to meet actually one of our backers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah, I can't remember the guy's name, unfortunately. But he did introduce himself as a backer, and he gave me a dice for the Lone Star Savages organization here in Texas.
Oh, cool!
And it was fantastic meeting one of our backers for the show for the Kickstarter. I'll get it eventually for the Kickstarter. And I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a new review up.
Yeah, I read that review today. That's pretty hot.
And yeah, well, they mentioned us as a Kickstarter success story, which I thought was one of the best parts of it.
Yeah.
And there's probably going to be another review coming up, hopefully this weekend. I did my second read-through of Accursed, so I can start taking notes for my full review.
Nice.
So, awesome.
Let me just say right off the top of the bat, I wrote everything that you like.
Well, did you write the entire damn book then? Because, seriously,
all the parts that you like.
All right, one last thing about Accursed, and then I'll shut up about it, I promise. Chris Avalone was on the show a while back, recently, and he mentioned that he really loved what you did with Baba Yaga.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he loved the whole thing with what's going on with her and the land that she's tied to.
Oh,
so,
man.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'll have to drop him a line on Twitter and say hey again.
All right, so yeah, I promise I'm done talking about Accursed. But yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming back to the show. We're glad to have you with us again.
Thanks for having me.
Tonight's show is going to be all about giant stompy robots, which is something you know quite a bit about.
I do. It's fair to say I know a little bit about giant robots.
Daryl, what about you? You also got your start with giant stompy robots.
My first tabletop game was the second edition of BattleTech. So, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, in some of my earliest gaming memories are playing BattleTech and Robotech and mixing one up for the other sometimes in junior high. So
it was easy to do in the old days.
So let's talk about mech games. Actually, I think probably the first thing. Well, actually, let's not talk about mech games quite yet because there is another thing we need to do before we get right into the meat of that. And I apologize for teasing listeners like that. That's really mean of me. That's really mean of me. I'm sorry. The next thing we do, actually, we're trying to get into this we're trying to get into this habit of doing the same things every time in the podcast, and so far it's been defeating me at every turn. But the next thing we do after we introduce our guests is we like to ask, what have you been playing lately? So I'm going to go first because I've been doing a whole shitload of stuff. ChupacabraCon was last weekend, and this was the first local game con to Austin I've ever been to. It was actually really, really cool. They put it up in the Airport Hilton, and they had games running Friday night, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning, which I thought was pretty cool. Not bad for a first time that this was ever running.
Oh, it was their first year.
Yeah.
They kickstarted the con, too.
They didn't fund, unfortunately.
They didn't?
No.
Oh, damn it.
But nevertheless, they did a good job, and they had a lot of good guests. Aaron Alston was there. Ernie Klein was there. Chris Pramus. Some guys I'd never met before, Aaron Doriv, who's really cool, Donna Pryor, some young novelists were there, some guys from Evil Hat. Unfortunately, I don't remember their names, but it's all on the website for ChupacabraCon. And me, I was one of the guests. So, things went well. I played a game of Durance, is what it's called. It's a game by one of the other guests, Jason Morningstar. He did Fiasco. Endurance is like an evolution of Fiasco. It was really, really cool. Although the game, being a GM-less game and being sort of about a prison colony in space, it devolved into cannibalism and murder pretty quickly.
Within the first 5 minutes, I'd assume.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But it was kind of awesome. I really enjoyed myself.
So you couldn't get that Lord of the Flies license for that one?
And then right after that, I played in a giant robot arena battle run by Aaron Alston, where we had 2 giant robots duking it out in the arena.
Nice.
I got my butt kicked pretty hard. You're in one of those nights where the dice are just not going to help you at all.
That's pretty much every single night I'm not behind the DM screen.
I just couldn't help myself but saying, well, that's an average roll. That's an average roll. That's a way below average roll. That's an average roll. That's a way below average roll. Just keeping track as I went. All day Saturday, I was in panels from the morning till the evening. So we did panels on world building and panels on how you become a creative guy in this industry, things like that. It was really exciting, really fun. I got to meet a lot of great people. The guys who created a game called Tefra, which is an RPG. It's like a steampunk RPG. They were there, and I got to say, one thing that's really interesting about those guys, they take steampunk seriously. Like, there's a requirement that if you work at this company, it's called Cracked Monocle, you must have magnificent facial hair. The creator of the game, Daniel Burrows, he's got these just gorgeous mutton chops. You want to just like grab them,
And if you're at a con in Texas, for the most part, the Tefra guys are almost always going to be there. And I got to say, you want to talk about dedication? These guys will wear a 3-piece suit to a fucking summer con.
Yeah.
In Texas.
Yeah.
I don't even wear my suits, and I always wear suits.
Aside from that, I just want to say we're still gearing up for Torg. I got to make my character the other night, and we're going to be talking more about that campaign and hopefully starting it this weekend. And next weekend, it looks like I'm going to be playing Rafe, that Shadowrun character I mentioned last episode.
Oh, nice.
It looks like I'm going to be playing him in a Skype game. So, that's what's going on with me as far as gaming. I hope to also do a session of our normal Accursed game this Saturday. So how about Jason? What have you been playing?
Honestly, I've been busy working on Star Wars stuff.
I thought you were going to answer with something like saxophone or trombone.
I have been playing the saxophone. I've been playing a lot of saxophone. Because it's, what's today, the 22nd? Yeah, I got 9 days before I fly to the Netherlands. So.
What are you going to the Netherlands for?
My band is going on tour in the Netherlands for 10 days.
Who's your band?
We're called the Detroit Party Marching Band. We're sort of a punk rock guerrilla brass band.
Okay, you've piqued my interest with the words punk rock.
I can get you a link.
Please.
There's lots of glitter involved.
Lots of glitter.
I hate glitter. I hate glitter. I hate glitter.
Lots of hard liquor.
That I like.
So it's good. It's good fun. Aside from saxophone, I've been playing a lot of Fallout New Vegas lately.
Woo! Chris Avalone says hello.
I got back into it because I, like an idiot, I stumbled into a thread on something awful about modding Fallout, modding the Fallout games, and I can't not mod. I think I ended up with something like 130 mods in my load order. I was playing a really good game of New Vegas. I'm almost done with it. I think it's like my 4th playthrough. But I downloaded some new quests and some new quest lines and some really great stuff. I ended up with a companion who is a near sentient spore plant.
Wow.
Named Audrey.
Feed me, Seymour.
And you deploy her like a mine. Right? So you toss her on the ground in the middle of a bunch of enemies, and she pops up, and she learns and she grows as you play her, and you have to feed her. So you feed her different kinds of meats, but then every so often she'll like wig out and dig through your pack looking for something. And she's a little telepathic, so she'll send you pictures of what she's looking for. And she's looking for a laser pistol and a laser rifle and a missile launcher and a baseball and all this other crap. And like she eats your laser pistol, and then she'll start spitting lasers.
Wow!
Right? Or she'll eat your 10mm submachine gun and start shooting bursts of 10mm at your enemies, and it's hysterical. It's absolutely hysterical.
That sounds pretty cool. We talked to Chris about some of the things he did with Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas, I should say. Mm-hmm. Specifically, like how you interact with Ulysses.
That guy, man.
Before you even meet him, though,
yeah.
You get to interact with him through the symbols he leaves behind, which I thought was really cool.
Yep. That guy. This playthrough, I actually killed him.
Wow.
Yep. I'd had enough.
You said message received and then shot him right in the head, right?
I had enough of his bullshit.
All right. Is that it? Is that what you've been playing lately?
That's mostly what I've been playing lately. Other than working on Star Wars, I'm running a bunch of Star Wars games at Gen Con this year. So I've been sort of making notes and outlines for my con games.
Yeah. All right, Daryl, what have you been playing?
I am stressing so bad about Gen Con because I've never been. And it's my first year that I'm really have the chance to go.
You'll be fine.
Well, there's like all this. There's not enough information on the website for everything I need, and everyone I talk to doesn't seem to know because they're all guests and they're not media. So I don't, and it's like really stressing me out because I'm like, but yeah, the registration isn't open until the 26th, but the hotel's open the 28th, and are they going to approve my press pass in enough time for me to get an access code to be able to get a hotel room? Where am I going to sleep? I'm going to sleep in the middle of the convention center. No, they'll kick me out. So dude, yeah, I've been kind of freaking out about that.
Chill out, man. It's going to be fine.
I'm sure it will, but I'm a worrier when it comes to things that I really care about.
I've actually been to Gen Con as press before.
You have?
So have I.
Yeah, I went to press in 2004. I was working for Games Workshop's White Dwarf at the time, so I said, "Hey, I work for White Dwarf. I want to go in as press," and they said, "Sure." Jason, how did you get in as press?
I asked for press credentials as part of Motor City GameWorks.
Your blog and
my old blog, yeah.
Your old blog, yeah.
The thing that's stressing out isn't so much getting in because I'm pretty sure I've got enough leverage to be able to get in, but it's the hotel room that's freaking me out because I hear rumors of, all the hotels in all of Indianapolis are going to sell out in like 15 minutes.
It's true that you need to get a hotel room early. It is true for that. However, there are ways and means to get one if you run out. Last couple of years, I ended up staying at the La Quinta, which is actually about 20 minutes away from the convention center. And it's remarkably comfortable. I have nothing but good things to say about the La Quinta. And they run a bus back and forth, so you're not going to miss out on anything. Good. Just because your hotel's not connected to the convention.
That's the other thing I'm worried about is because I don't drive. So
you'll be fine. You will be fine.
Where do you live that you can survive not driving?
Orange, Texas, which surprisingly enough is not a public transportation friendly town. I just so happened to be able to carpool to my new job. My new job is right across the street from a big supermarket that has some really nice stuff, right next door to a drugstore. So I can, lunchtime, let me walk over and get what I need and stash it and then bring it home with me at the carpool. So
how much you want to bet he goes to the drugstore instead of the department store?
A lot.
Well, I have to cross a 7-lane road to get to the grocery store. Plus, you can't exactly buy a lot of groceries because they need to be refrigerated. So
we were just making a joke about how you're a druggie. That's all it is.
I'm not a druggie. I'm a drunk. There's a difference.
Oh no, I wasn't suggesting he was a drug addict. I was suggesting he was just a gamer and lazy. And, wow. The drugstore's close enough.
This escalated quickly.
Right. As far as what I've actually been playing, again, I gotta say, I haven't been playing much. Like I said, I read through Accursed for the second time. I've been trying to catch up on I've got a stack of stuff I just have not been able to get to because of how crazy the holiday season's been. Games that I need to play to review for the site and books I need to read for it. So I'm starting to work through that queue. I did a lot of work on the website that, you may notice. Actually, you probably won't notice because it's all behind the scenes stuff. But I spent about 3 hours on that today. But
we promise it's better.
It is much better. You just won't notice how better it is. Cause it's, like I said, it's all behind the scenes. It has to do with our advertising and sponsors and reorganizing how stuff shows up and everything. And I'm also setting up stuff for a couple of ideas I have that I'm not ready to announce yet that we're going to be expanding into. But, one thing we're recording this on January 22nd. My birthday is January 25th, which is the Saturday. And this is my first year where normally I plan out my birthday like 3 weeks in advance. I've got reservations. I got big, huge party plans. I know exactly what I'm doing. This year, I haven't figured out anything. And today I just decided when I'm sitting at work, it's like, what do I really want to do for my birthday? I just want to play a shitload of games. So That's my plan.
That's not a bad. That's a great plan.
I've got a stack of about 8 board games I got over the holidays. Plus, between my birthday and Christmas, I've got like a stack of books. I've got all these plans for games I want to run, all these plans for games, RPGs I want to play. I'm just going to wake up on my birthday and start fucking playing games, and just that's all I'm doing until I pass out at night.
Sounds like a good plan to me.
Except for a break at midnight when I run and go, or 11. Well, no, they're in Central Time. So midnight, I'm going to run and register for Gen Con. Then I'm going to go back and go play more games.
If that is what you've been playing lately, we should probably dive right into the meat of our topic, which is giant robot / mecha / mech. I'm sure there's a bunch of different names I'm not thinking right now. Exoframe, I think, is one. But basically, if it's a giant robot and it's in a role-playing game, that's what we're here to talk about tonight.
And I kind of wanted to define a term real quick. What exactly is the difference between a mech or a mecha and, like power armor?
Well, power armor you wear. Mecha you pilot.
That is the commonly accepted definition, as far as I'm aware, is that if you are sitting in a cockpit and it's still shaped like a giant robot, it's a giant robot or a mecha.
Yeah.
If you are wearing it like a suit and it's shaped like a giant robot, then it's power armor.
Yeah. Iron Man is power armor. Voltron is a giant robot.
Okay, but kind of thought there'd be a little bit more in-depth discussion on that one, but that sums it up perfectly right there. Okay.
Well, some games do have a little more granular definitions. Actually, like the one that comes to mind. Okay, so like before the show, I made a list of role-playing games that have giant robots in them as a big deal. Okay, and one of those games is Rifts.
Yes.
Now, Rifts has both giant robots and power armor in it, and they have a definition of both of them, which is actually really interesting. And it seems to be not only what we just said about, whether you're sitting in a cockpit, but also there's a size thing in Rifts. Like, it's not really a mecha unless it's a certain size or bigger.
There's also something that always really bothered me about Rifts was, like, a lot of the suits, you're not really wearing them, but they're still powered armor. Like, some of these suits are 10 and 12 and 14 feet tall, and they're still classified as powered armor. But I think it's the Ultimax?
Yeah, the Ultimax is
sit in a cockpit.
Yeah, there's a very specific power armor suit called the Ultimax that was published in the first source book for Rifts. And I remember reading it when it first came out and going to myself, huh? Because they describe it, it's listed under the power armor section, but then they go on to describe that you're sitting in a cockpit
and it's
when you're
16
driving.
feet tall.
And then they even mention, and this is like the funny part, is that they even talk about it in the description that like the people who sell it don't really know which category to put it in. Even the guys who were like selling it to you were like, well, it's sort of one and sort of the other. And
reminds me of that car commercial from, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, where someone drives away with something, and so they're trying to describe the car. And it's like, well, it's a car, but it's an SUV, but it's not an SUV, and it's not a car, and it's like, that's called a station wagon.
Yes.
Well, okay, here's something that's interesting as well, on the same topic of power armor and giant robots. If you look at, and this is something I think Jason will have a good perspective on, if you look at the Robotech line, in Macross, there is basically no such thing as powered armor. It's all giant robots all the time.
Right.
And you go to Southern Cross, and it's still mostly true that if you're piloting something that looks like a giant robot, like 9 times out of 10, it's a giant robot.
Well, I mean, when you look at the source material, when you look
No, that's fine. Then you get to the third generation, though.
That's Crusher Joe, isn't it?
No.
I think it's something completely different. Okay.
Yeah.
No, the third section of Robotech is
Genesis, Climber,
Most Beta.
And what's really interesting about that is the majority of the action of that show takes place on a power armored scale. And I would even say the main feature of that game is the power, which is the Cyclone. It's the motorcycle that turns into power armor.
Exactly. We can't belabor that point enough. It's not just a suit of powered armor. It is a high-performance, multi-role motorcycle that turns into a suit of power.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a motorcycle and power armor. It's a motorcycle that transforms into power armor.
Yes,
and that's freaking badass.
And then it folds up into a cube, and you could put it in a special compartment in your airplane that also turns into a giant robot.
But Jason, okay, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this, because it does change the whole paradigm of Robotech as far as like how you play when you get into that third generation, because of the emphasis on the Cyclones and the emphasis on that scale. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, Mospeada is a much smaller scale. I'm going to continue to refer to them by their sort of source material names. Mospeada is a smaller scale story, and it's smaller scale action than Macross, right? Because Macross is Top Gun in space with lasers. You know, it's a carrier drama.
Agreed.
You know, Mospeada is guerrilla fighting. I don't think the action isn't any less exciting in Mospeada, but it's more personal.
And thus the emphasis on the power armor over the mecha.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Mospeada did a really good job of showing that the alphas, the alpha strike fighters and the betas are kind of useless on world. You know, on the planet. They're too big, they're too ostentatious, they take too much energy to run. You know, you sort of need them for the shock and awe,
right,
if you will. But most of your heavy lifting is going to be done by the Cyclones. It's going to be done on that personal scale.
And
even the Invid mech, the Invid mech are small compared to the Regals from Macross.
And I think there's a point I want to bring around to this as well, is that you can kind of hold up a mirror to the progression of the Robotech RPG from Giant Robot to Power Armor, and also show that in the Mech Warrior role-playing game. Because Mech Warrior starts out in a period of time where battle mechs are the only real giant robots you've got.
Oh man, do we have to talk about clans?
Yes,
well, I think we have to talk about clans. Because they introduced... To the BattleTech universe, they're the ones who introduced
the elementals,
powered armor.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get that, now when you're talking about the role playing game of BattleTech, which is Mech Warrior, or later on Time of War, that is actually a much bigger deal in the role playing side than on the tabletop side.
And then they also have the proto-mechs that come in the later era.
I'd argue that those are less.
The whole idea behind them was supposed to be kind of like a middle ground between power armor and mechs, but they're still mechs. That's why they call them proto-mechs.
Daryl, you're not wrong. They do exist. My thinking, though, is that they're so rare and so little known in the universe that I think that they're a much smaller factor, is all I'm saying.
In the fiction, most likely, but not in the games I play.
Okay. Fair enough. You've probably played more Mech Warrior games than I have, actually. So, there's that.
Yeah, the second they show up, everyone's like, ooh, I want to play one of these. Because you can play like 80 of them for one, like, Warhammer.
Okay. All right. Well, let's, so we've kind of talked about that. Now, I think a really good question to ask, and I want to put this out to Jason and then Daryl. What makes a game about giant robots and or power armor? I'm just going to combine them together for the purposes of this discussion. What makes a game about giant robots so appealing compared to other sci-fi genres?
I kind of have an answer to that. They're giant fucking robots. Come on. How is that not awesome? Rad. It's giant robots kicking the shit out of each other. How can that not be cool? There was a movie that was built around the idea of BattleTech versus Godzilla that came out this summer called Pacific Rim. And it was awesome.
Okay.
I fight scenes were going to reference Robot Jocks.
Robot Jocks? Yeah, I'd rather watch Robot Jocks.
Oh my gosh.
Don't say that around my editor. Now I'm not saying it's a perfect movie. It is kind of by the numbers, but I'm talking about just the scenes with the giant robots beating the hell out of giant monsters and vice versa. Come on.
I'll tell you what. I could watch a movie that's nothing but 180 minutes of Cherno Alpha beating the shit, punching the shit out of monsters for Mother Russia.
Okay, so we all agree that they're cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? That's maybe the biggest reason, is just because they're cool. I'm actually going to go a little further, though. You know, in a lot of sci-fi games, other sci-fi genres, I would even say, whenever you're talking about like the big pieces of technology, you're usually talking about like a spaceship. Those spaceships can range from the Millennium Falcon all the way up to the Cathedrals in Space of Rogue Trader, where you have like, you know, tens of thousands of people on board. But in those cases, it feels like a ship. It feels like something that has a crew, right? It doesn't really feel, to coin a phrase from Jason, it doesn't feel Top Gun. And that's where I think the giant robot comes in, because it's typically one pilot, and you feel a lot more personal and attached to that.
Yeah. It's very much the pilot versus pilot, you know, the Sky Knight adventures, the Biggles Goes to War, you know, the real daring, brave, and talented jet pilot or airplane pilot from the war who does battle, you know, with another single pilot. You know, it's almost like single combat with knights.
It's like World War II aces.
Yeah.
In the sky, only except for
even World War I aces.
Yeah, that's this whole sky Knights of the Sky thing is the World War I aces, you know. Dudes in goggles and white scarves.
And it's all officers, they're all gentlemen, they're all lieutenants, and they really took a lot of trappings from at the time equestrian. That's where they got the goggles and the leather caps and all that stuff, because they kind of had to make up all their traditions on their own on the fly, because planes were only invented like not even 20 years before when World War I came out.
I think it's obvious, but we should probably say it anyway. But it's obvious that giant robot games owe an awful lot more to anime than they do to World War I.
They do. And if you want to trace the origins, they owe a lot more to World War II, because a lot of Japan's technological obsession comes from the fact that before World War II, Japan typically as a culture were very much warrior pride, samurai. If you believe in what you're doing and you are just, then you will win. And all that spirituality kind of got crushed when we dropped 2 atomic bombs on them, and they lost the war due to technology. So there was a big cultural shift, and you can see that in Godzilla, and you can see that in a lot of the anime, where there is a big shift toward, okay, spirituality isn't going to solve all our problems. How are we going to meld our spirituality with this technology that we now know has all this power? And so that's one of the theories of why there was such a resurgence, especially starting with Astro Boy, and then moving on into Macross and Gundam and all of those.
Well, I think I'd like to start maybe going over some of the games that are really involved with giant robots. And I'm going to pick one that I've played that I don't think a lot of people have played. And it's a kind of rules light. I'm not going to say super rules light, but compared to many of the other giant robot games that are on the list, it's pretty rules light. Have either of you guys ever played or heard of Jovian Chronicles?
I've heard of it. I've never played it.
I've heard the name, and that's it.
So Jovian Chronicles is a sci-fi game about giant robots. I would classify it as like Gundam plus Traveler, where you have these
Can you die during character creation?
Well, no. But there's these sort of space nations, and they're sort of still working out political issues, and it's not just about military action. You know, there's a lot of things you can do as a giant robot that aren't just, I go to fight for my nation. Jovian Chronicles was interesting to me as it's got kind of a different tone than almost all the other giant robot games that are out there. I think it was made by the same guys, DreamPod 9, I think it was made by the same guys who do Heavy Gear. It's kind of like a brighter reflection of that gritty Heavy Gear style out in space. I don't really have much else to say about it, but I wanted to bring it up as an example of something that I want to kind of start from the more obscure and move to the more well-known.
Yeah, I've never heard of that one, but it sounds kind of interesting. I do remember Heavy Gear, though.
Heavy Gear is pretty great.
Yeah, I can't remember much about it, but I do remember it.
Now, Heavy Gear has got a couple of different ways to play it. Like, one way to play it is kind of your standard, typical, we are fighting for our nation, we are military guys in giant robots. There's a planet called Terra Nova that's being fought between the North and South. Different nations are squabbling. And one of the cool things about it is they have these big-ass deserts, and they have sand ships, like carriers. Imagine the Sandcrawler from Star Wars, right? But it's treated exactly like a boat. It's pretty cool. There is also another way to play Heavy Gear, though, that I think is really cool and interesting. I'm glad they did it this way. They took that idea of professional duelists, and they took the idea of I want to say it's more auto-duel, where they have like this idea that there's a whole culture of guys that get up in their giant robots and fight for sponsors, and it's much more corporate. It's much more, I think you could tell a really interesting story on like a tournament circuit of duelists who are fighting with that political, background.
Well, BattleTech had a whole campaign setting based around that Solaris 7.
Solaris 7, yeah. But there's a difference there. I think with Heavy Gear, I think they did it in a way that is slightly distinct. I won't say greatly distinct, but it's slightly distinct in that it's distinct enough for me to mention it as a cool way to play Heavy Gear.
Exactly.
And Jason, have you played Heavy Gear? Or?
I haven't played Heavy Gear, but I've read a lot about it, and I've on and off been trying to get some work with DreamPod 9. So.
Yeah, I know next to nothing about it. I know I've read about it at some point in time, but I just, for the life of me, I cannot remember anything. Terra Nova rings a bell.
It's a really cool game, and it appeals to the mechanics side of me. It appeals to my nuts and bolts side, because there's a lot of really cool mechanical technobabble in it. Just about the way the gears are put together. They call them the mecha gears.
Right.
Just the way they're put together, and their computers and their drive systems and their the history of the engines that they use. They use multi-fuel, or they use flex fuel V-twin air breathing engines.
One thing I also like is that all the ground gears, and they're almost all ground gears.
Yeah.
They all have basically a way to drive. I mean, if you don't have to walk.
Yeah, they can skate.
They can basically, if you let's say you're going on a long trip in your power armor. Well, you wouldn't want to run because there was a lot of jarring and up and down motion and stuff like that. So they have these wheels and motors and stuff built into their feet, and they can just sort of kind of there's like a stable position they can sort of get their legs into and just drive, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's Heavy Gear. There is another evolution of that called Gear Krieg, which goes back to World War II. And this is, I honestly know very, very little about Gear Krieg, so I'm just going to keep it very short and say that it exists.
I like the sound of it.
And there's also something that's coming out in the future I just want to make a mention of along the same vein. It's going to be a Dust role-playing game from Chris Birch over at Modiphius is working on it.
If I may mention this, I just talked to Chris Birch about doing some work on Dust and Mutant Chronicles.
Hey,
nice.
So I'm gonna be doing some diesel powered spaceships and some World War II giant robots.
Fantastic.
I'm stoked.
That's awesome. Good for you, buddy. And so that's going to take us out of the ones that are kind of really obscure. I think we're going to more or less stick to the really more well-known ones now. What's actually, I'm going to throw this out to our guest, Jason. What's the next game we should talk about giant robots?
Do you guys know anything about Mecha? The game Mecha?
I didn't know there was.
Yeah, there's one. I've seen it once, and I know I looked through it, but I can't remember a damn thing.
It's my man Chris Perrin, my good buddy Chris Perrin. It's his baby with his partner. I think their company is Heroic Journeys Publishing. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a very anime-inspired, rules-light, sort of narrative-driven giant robot game. It very much embraces the silliness of a lot of what I consider the silliness of giant robot games. Like you want to blow up a giant robot with a pistol? You can. That kind of thing, It's a really cool game. I like the rule system. It's a cool game for light gaming. It's not a serious business, rules heavy, use Sturm und Drang kind of game. It's very easy to play. It's very fun.
Cool.
So yeah, that's my shout out for Mecha.
Daryl, what about you? If you need to pick a game to talk about that's about giant robots, what would you pick?
You probably know what I would pick, but I'm actually going to go for a slightly obscure version of it. There was a tabletop game that was released by WizKids called MechWarrior Dark Ages. That was one of their clicky games that was based in the BattleTech universe. I think it was 120 years in the future of where they'd left off when FASA stopped producing new material. And it was, mechs have been outlawed for years. No more battle mechs because the Great War with Comstar was so horrible, and we united in the new Star League, and there's peace and prosperity, and of course that doesn't last very long in the BattleTech world, and they start going to war again, except for now they're having to there's not really a lot of giant mechs in the first set. There's a lot of vehicles and tanks and infantry, and most of the mechs are either ones from way back when that barely run because they haven't been maintained. They're having to be dragged out of mothballs, or they're like, agricultural or construction mechs that have been retrofitted with weapons. And then they eventually move in where, okay, yeah, now they've ramped up production and now here's your Warhammer, here's your Battlemaster, here's your Mad Cat.
Without getting too in depth into that, I think it's fair to say that the Dark Age storyline and the Dark Age setting in general is a fairly controversial topic amongst BattleTech fans. Would you agree with that? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
And I could deal with some of the stuff they did with the setting for that if it weren't for the fact that they made a miniatures game for BattleTech with cheap pre-painted plastic miniatures that didn't look absolutely horrible. And they scaled them 20% too big to use in the classic BattleTech game.
Well, let's explore that role-playing side of it because, of course, the Giant Robot game for BattleTech, the miniature game, had the RPG side, which is MechWarrior and The Time of War. And you got your start playing MechWarrior, isn't that right?
I never actually played the MechWarrior RPG until after I'd played Shadowrun, but I have played it a couple of times. I was much more into the tabletop version of it, except for I don't really count what we did, because it was more like choose your own adventure than it was an actual role-playing game. We didn't do dice. We didn't have really characters because we were like 11 years old. We didn't know any better.
Okay.
But I had a crap load of the MechWarrior books and I read them a lot.
Well, I'm going to throw out some stuff about MechWarrior because I did try to play it. I think the system always, now specifically MechWarrior, not A Time of War, but the system always kind of threw me off a little bit. I didn't really care for the way that the system was made, and I'm just going to say it was not made for people like me. I'm not going to say it was good or bad. The thing I always thought was weird, and I don't know if this is true for you, but the thing for me that was weird is that whenever we would go into battle in our mechs, we would just play BattleTech.
Yep. That's what pretty much everyone did. And here's the biggest problem with that system is there were two different skill sets for piloting and gunnery. And the MechWarrior system did not cross over to the BattleTech system. So your character's stats that you worked so hard to build up experience points to improve them didn't transfer to the game properly because they weren't parallel in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think that's the thing I felt was kind of a missed opportunity with MechWarriors. If that's what people were going to do, is play BattleTech to simulate the battles between giant robots, I really wanted to see a way to bring over some of the creativity and like we talked about recently, like defining what an RPG is for me, right? Is coming up with a creative solution to a problem. And I always wanted to be able to do that in my giant robot, right? I mean, that's one of the things I think is fun is in a mecha game is come up with something creative to do.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the answer to everything when you're in a giant robot is punching.
That's not true. I mean, like if you look at Gundam,
physical combat
right?
is dishonorable.
No. If you look at Gundam, right? Some of the things they do in battles isn't just shooting at each other. Like there's a scene where this guy unloads a clip into the ground to raise up a smoke screen so that he can hide. Right? I think that's awesome.
How come that mech wasn't equipped with smoke launchers?
Well, I don't know. But I think the point is that's a cool way to do something, interesting and that isn't just I shoot the other guy.
Jason, were you ever in the military?
No.
Ross, why wasn't the mech equipped with smoke guns? Because some officer somewhere decided to send them to another troop.
Well, okay, that's getting into the whole culture of Gundam and like the differences between Gundams and Zaku's and like that's a big deal.
I'm talking about just militaries in general.
Right.
Some brass upstairs didn't pay attention to what's going on in the ground.
Well, and there's more that needs to be said here. Okay, honestly, seriously, if we're going to look at this, like in the Gundam universe, they have this stuff called Minovsky particles. And what Minovsky particles do is they make radar useless. So things that you and I would think of as being pointless tricks in a power armor combat, like smoke, like putting up debris, would be easily defeatable by things like thermal imagers and radar and all kinds of gear that we have and use in our modern militaries. But in the Gundam universe, that does not work. It allows you to have cool battles with high-tech stuff like beam sabers and rockets and giant robots, but they get to use more primitive, practical tactics like I'm going to put smoke or, in this case, debris from the ground up into the air, and it's going to physically stop your pilot from seeing me.
And I know BattleTech in the game rules had a lot of stuff like that. I don't know if they had anything that actually explained why the radar and everything else wasn't useless, because a lot of BattleTech is played at ranges that even in the 80s when it was designed make no sense, because we were dealing at that point in time with ranges in miles and kilometers, not in, meters, not 30 meters away.
Well, I think, yeah. The thing I want to take away, I want hopefully you guys to take away from what I said, though, is I think that's my biggest disappointment with MechWarriors, that I didn't feel like it didn't feel like the game was giving me any tools to allow me to do anything creative in the mech battles. And I'm just going to leave that there. So
you could run the BattleTech, the mech combat in MechWarrior, but I tried it once and I gave up after about 30 minutes because it just, sure, you had a lot more freedom, but it just wasn't as fun because of the way the rules weren't built for that.
It's fair to say one of my least favorite ways to roleplay giant robots is with the MechWarrior system.
Now, the classic BattleTech RPG, A Time of War, did fix a lot of those problems, but not 100%.
It's got its own issues. Yeah. Let's probably save that for like an actual review of the game at some point. But it's like the only thing I'll say that comes right off the top of my head with A Time of War. Jason, are you familiar with playing BattleTech at all? Have you played BattleTech?
I've played a handful of games. I never owned any of the books. I never owned any of my own miniatures. Right. But I had friends back home in my hometown that if I showed up to their apartment 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, there'd be a BattleTech map laid out.
So you're familiar with the core mechanic?
Yeah. It's been a while, but yeah.
It's 2d6 and add.
Yeah.
That's the core mechanic. Well, the core mechanic for A Time of War is 2d6 and subtract.
Yeah.
That's a little counterintuitive. That's kind of my problem with it. Okay, so let's, it feels like it's only going to get more awkward if we keep talking about MechWarrior, because I really love BattleTech. I love the universe of BattleTech. I love the writing of the stories, and I love the whole background, and I even love some of the mechs. I think the mechs are freaking awesome. And originally one of our guests was supposed to be Randall Bills, the kind of BattleTech guru. So I feel a little guilty slamming MechWarrior, but well, I think I'm going to pick another one to talk about then, since Jason got to pick and Daryl got to pick. Well, Daryl, do you have anything more you wanted to say about it before we move on?
While we're talking about MechWarrior, I really do want to talk about the actual BattleTech game itself, though. The tabletop game, it was some of the most fun I ever had growing up, was playing that game, because
it's a super cool game.
It was kind of like chess, except for you're in giant robots. And like I said, that's pretty much the only miniature game I've ever really played when it comes to, I've never played Warhammer, I've never played War Machine, never played, Malifaux. So I don't really know if I'd probably fall in love with those games if I could ever get miniatures painted. But I really loved BattleTech. It was just so much fun to sit there and play this. And the way the universe was written was so much fun too, because it wasn't just, this army's fighting this army. Each army had its own system set up, and all the mechs were treated like World War I aces or like knights. In House Davion, you were basically a knight if you owned a battle mech, because
that depends on the era, Daryl.
I'm talking about
you're spinning off 3025, and we need to make it clear to our readers, our listeners, I should say. We're going to need to make it clear to our listeners that BattleTech
we're talking
a great deal of different eras that each have their own characterization.
Yeah, we're talking pre-Federated Commonwealth here. But if you had battle, it was treated like you having full set of armor back in the medieval days. You had power, you had a title. That got you land, that got you political power.
It's fair to say I'm also a big fan of the 3025 era.
And I absolutely love the 3050 era when the clans showed up, which is what all the needling between Jason and I have been, is I don't think he's a big fan of the clans.
not really.
I liked it because it really introduced something new. I like, because one of the fun things about BattleTech is being able to make your own mechs. I spent countless hours just sitting there fiddling around. Okay, I'm a little over on tonnage, so let me take this one out and put this in instead, and just fiddling with all those things. This is pre all the little software that automated all this. I'm doing this on notebook paper, trying to figure out all these calculations, and it was just so much fun.
The introduction of the clans, though, the troublesome thing about the introduction of the clans wasn't their story, wasn't the idea. The troublesome thing was that they all had a much higher technology base. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter was that a clan mech was just better.
Yes.
In almost every way than an Inner Sphere mech.
And they had the ability to produce their equipment, which is what I liked about the earlier BattleTech stuff, which is where, we can't build this mech anymore because the technology is lost and the factory that was built to make the armor plates doesn't exist anymore. It was blown up in this great famous battle.
Well, some people really like that part, Jason. I'm just going to throw that out there. But
I like that part a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so you like the Mad Max sort of...
Yeah.
Okay.
I like Mad Max with giant robots.
Like the fact that a 500-year-old mech is a lot better than a brand spanking new one because they hadn't lost the technology yet.
Exactly.
Now, I do appreciate that aspect of it too, but I liked the clans, and I think one of the big problems a lot of people have with the clans isn't necessarily that they had better tech, but that a lot of people didn't use the balancing factor against that, was that they had very, very strict rules they had to follow in combat.
Well, no, Daryl, I don't think that's the issue, honestly. Okay, yes, that was intended to be the balancing factor, but what it meant was you had to take your casual game of fighting giant robots and add yet another layer of stuff to remember on top.
And there's also the fact that gamers are not going to do that. They're going to take that rule and they're going to throw it out the window.
Limiting yourself tactically when you have all these fun toys to play with is kind of the opposite of fun. I mean, I was like, wow, that's really cool that I have all this great gear, but there's no way I'm just going to, sort of have all my decisions dictated for me by this code of honor.
And it's part of the reason why I'm probably looking at it through a little bit more of a nostalgia filter is that's also when I started to really get into... I was a Clans player.
You were, okay.
And I also got into the game right around the time that the clan invasion happened in the storyline of the game. About 2 or 3 years after I got into it, and that's when I was kind of at my peak of BattleTech obsession, was right in the middle of the clans. And if we had Inner Sphere mechs, we were fighting other Inner Sphere mechs. We were playing clans, we were fighting other clan mechs. So we never had that mixed together thing. And of course, we did ignore those battle rules as well. And all the codes of honor, but we had equal tech versus equal tech. So that might have something to do with why I don't have the same reaction you guys did.
That's the default that we ended up playing anyway, just because we all realized that the code of honor rules really weren't that much fun. That's kind of the core of why I think people have a bad taste in their mouth about the clan, is that it changed the game, the way the game was played, so radically. Because you used to have an idea of what BattleTech was about, right? Like how it worked. Then the clans come along, and all of a sudden you've got power armor dudes jumping around. You've got artillery mechs, dropping laser guided rockets on your head, and then you got this, then you have that. You get the weird layer of the code of honor system, and then if you wanted to have a balanced fight between clan and Inner Sphere, and even if you didn't want to deal with the code of honor, there was that. People were like, they weren't used to thinking in terms of stuff like battle value. They were used to thinking in terms of tons, because everything was balanced against each other.
Battle value just came out a little bit after the clans, didn't it? That was like mid 3rd edition of the tabletop game, wasn't it?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you when it showed up, but
I think it was Battle Force 2nd edition is when they started having the value of it.
My point is that there really wasn't a way to balance before battle value, and even after battle value, people just weren't used to thinking that way. And I think that's why it sounds like I'm dumping all over the clans. So I want to be clear. I think the clans are really cool. I think their idea was great. I just think the implementation into the way the game was played had some unforeseen and unfortunate consequences.
So what do you think about how it ended up getting balanced out toward later in the game after the peace and after the Inner Sphere started basically reverse engineering all the clan tech and coming up with new stuff that the clans didn't have, and they started having basically almost the same level of tech? Did that kind of fix it for you, or were you just out of it by then?
Well, honestly, I'd kind of moved on to other games. I'd moved on to stuff that resolved faster than BattleTech. I mean, BattleTech's a fun game, but if you play a more than 4-on-4, you're talking about a really, really long game. And sometimes even 4-on-4 can be a really long game because of the way the game is set up. It's kind of a battle of attrition where I knock a little armor off you, I knock a little armor off of you.
I still remember we played a 16-on-16 once in high school over a weekend.
Yeah, so
the whole weekend.
We had, we had to leave the table set up whenever we were just like sitting there. Okay, one of us is going to fall asleep and knock the pieces over. We need to go to bed.
And I'm just going to point out that in our show about the Gamers Tavern Awards, which is going to be up,
it was up right before this episode.
Oh, well, there you go. The Gamers Tavern Awards, we actually talk about Alpha Strike, which is the new way to play BattleTech that just came out this last year. And it is awesome. It is so quick to play. It is so elegant. It is so simple. It is fast, furious fun. It is everything I wanted out of BattleTech. So if you guys hear us talking about BattleTech and talking about, like, it takes a really long time and it's complex, don't think that we don't like BattleTech. Think that you should check out Alpha Strike instead, because it's pretty sweet. It's
the first big major overhaul to the rule system, aside, not counting the clicky system, since the game was created in 1984.
Yeah.
So
check out Alpha Strike. That's my final word on that. Okay, so anything more about MechWarrior?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything at this point.
All right, let's go back and talk about something we just briefly kind of glossed over early with that question about power armor and giant robots. The Rifts role-playing game has a pretty hefty focus. I mean, while it is a kitchen sink system, and while it does have like magic and psionics and all kinds of stuff, you've got crazy ninja cyborg dragons in it, right? Giant robots and mecha are surprisingly a big part of that game, and I say surprisingly because it's a pleasant surprise to me. I enjoy the fact that one of the big deals in Rifts is that you can play a guy, like, right straight out of the core book. They have a guy called the Glitter Boy Pilot, which is a special kind of power armor. I really like the fact that in a world full of dragons and giants and, evil wizards and shit, a perfectly normal answer is I'm going to get my giant robot and fight them off to protect my village.
Pretty much. Yeah. No, some of my very favorite giant robots are out of Rifts.
They have a really nice selection of really cool looking designs.
Yeah, I think my favorite giant robot in Rifts is the the NGV-7. It's made by Northern Gun. They call it's the Hunter. It's basically a walking artillery piece.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
It's sort of wasp-waisted and has that huge 120 millimeter Rheinmetall cannon on its head.
Yeah, it looks like a rhino horn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they got
awesome.
They got all kind. I mean, like, seriously, it runs the gamut from the it runs the gamut from power armor, like the Ultimax, that you could almost imagine being built someday, to like giant robots shaped like elephants.
Yeah.
And giant robots shaped like turtles and shit.
God, I forgot about those.
And the Katani designs from Atlantis and other stuff. That stuff is really, it's like these weird techno serpent things. They're kind of badass.
I like a lot of the
Ewell
robots.
was the artist. A guy named Newton Ewell was the artist on those, and he just really did a great job with making them look sort of techno organic.
I'm Facebook friends with Newt.
Okay.
And he's a real cool dude. Dude can draw.
He certainly can. I love all the Triax designs. I think it's cool that
the German stuff is phenomenal.
Well, the best part, like, from an art point of view, is that you can clearly see they're all part of the same faction.
Mm-hmm.
And like the Coalition stuff, you can clearly tell it's all part of the same stuff. And they did a really good job on that front of their artwork, just making you want to like drive that thing around and blow up bad guys.
Well, it all depends on who's drawing it.
In general,
this is serious heretical talk right here. But man, Kevin Long's art leaves me cold. His robots are so flat. His people are so flat. But like Ramon,
I'm not sure we can be friends anymore.
Ramon can draw a robot.
Ramon
Ramon
Perez,
did the best version of the Northern Gun Samson I have ever seen.
Just to be clear, we're talking about Ramon Perez.
Ramon Perez, yeah.
And I agree that he is completely badass.
Yeah, Ramon.
But Kevin Long is actually responsible for all those designs and Triax that we were just talking about.
I know, and they're phenomenal when they're executed by other artists.
But the basic look, I think you'd have to agree, the basic look designed by Kevin Long does flow really well as they're all part of the same faction.
Yeah, no, I will say that Long did a great illustration of a Jaeger, which is a suit of German powered armor, and it's sort of like in the hangar, and the pilot's inside of it doing a pre-flight, and there are a couple of technicians standing around it, and one of the technicians has a fueling line hooked up to its leg, and the Jaeger's all opened up, and so you can see inside of it where the pilot is. And the pilot's in there flipping switches, and he's got a big shit-eating grin on his face because, hey, I'm going to pilot this powered armor, and I'm going to go out, and I'm going to, kick a gargoyle's head in.
Now, from a role-playing perspective, being a power armor pilot or a robot pilot in Rifts is one of the ways you can actually experience both styles of Rifts play, where you can be an SDC guy in an SDC world and do normal things with normal people if you want, but you can also suit up in your giant robot and go toe-to-toe with a gargoyle or a dragon. It's kind of the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. And there's, all the giant robots and all the power armor have, these really, if you're into tech, right, just the write-ups of all the shit that they can do, all the sensors, all the different guns. They all have multiple weapon systems and multiple reasons to use them.
Oh, yeah.
The one thing that's always a little weird to me is that in Rifts you have your basic, it's not basic, but everybody has a hand-to-hand combat ability, and that's for you as a normal person. But
that's for you on the ground,
right? Yeah. But if you drive a suit of power armor or a robot, you have an additional set of hand-to-hand that kind of goes on top of that.
The robot combat.
It's a little clunky because you have to do a lot of bookkeeping. Little meaning a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. The Palladium system was never, ever meant to have mech combat in it.
But they tried their butts off.
They tried their damnedest.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work.
Jason or Daryl, did you have anything more you want to say about Rifts? Because I think I've run out, but...
I never got a chance to really play Rifts, so... All I really know about it is from what I've heard you say about it and my experiences really, really, really kind of trying when I was a kid and a couple of times since I was an adult. And I can't get past the system. Man.
I should point out that there is a unique form of power armor that Rifts kind of invented. I may be stretching a little bit by saying, how unique and distinct it is, but it's a very significant marker for what is Rifts, right? Is this particular style of power armor, and it's called Samus.
Well, the Sams, yeah.
The Samus is a type of power armor that stands upright but flies.
It doesn't morph into a little ball and...
No.
It's got a jetpack, essentially.
Yeah. It's not that. It's not just that, though, because when you imagine a dude with a jetpack, you imagine the Rocketeer or Superman, and they're always kind of flying with it, thrusting their upper body in a certain direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you look at a Samus, it looks like something that's way different than that, because you're standing straight up. You're almost like surfing rather than flying with a jetpack, because it's pushing directly against your whole body, right? It's pushing you through the air. Honestly, trying to describe it, if you're interested, listeners, look up all capital letters SAMAS and then the word Rifts, and you will find pictures of this thing. Right. And the only reason I mention it is because it is kind of cool and unique and different. That's the only reason I brought it up.
My biggest problem with the Sams the Samus suits is, okay, so there's the Samus suit that's in the Rifts core book, and then there's a couple of Sam variants that are in Coalition War Campaign, which are really cool. And then it's like every goddamn new faction that comes out in Rifts has a version of the Samus. That are all descended from the same goddamn pre-war blueprints.
Yeah, it seems like people like the Samus and they want more of it.
Yes.
Apparently.
So I'm getting the vibe that you have strong feelings about this, Jason.
You're going to notice the more you get to know me and the longer we hang out, I have really strong opinions and I'm not really afraid to share them. Especially because I'm halfway through this big rocks glass full of rye whiskey.
So yeah, speaking of rye whiskey, I think it's about time for me to get another round. You guys ready for a break?
Yeah. My wife actually finally just got home, so I want to go hear her battle report.
Have you been looking for a dark fantasy RPG setting? Are you interested in seeing a new take on the action horror genre? Then you should check out Accursed. Accursed is a setting for the Savage Worlds RPG created by me, Ross Watson, and my good friends Jason Marker and John Dunn. It is a world where the heroes are monsters who fight for redemption against the witches who have conquered their land. To find out more about Accursed, search for Accursed on DriveThruRPG.com. Accursed is now on sale there and in many other fine retailers for gaming PDFs. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy Accursed.
And we're back for episode 18, talking with Jason Marker about giant robot games. And something that occurred to me during the break is I want to make it clear to the listeners that it sounds like none of us are actually experts on things like MechWarrior and A Time of War RPG. So if we get something wrong, like I said, I made several statements tonight about like how games work. And if I got something wrong, please don't hesitate to let us know in the comments, because I would really love to hear from you.
I'm going to tell you.
It's certainly possible I got something wrong in those games, because I am not an expert.
I'm going to tell you right now that I definitely got some stuff wrong in MechWarrior, both probably when I was talking about it and definitely back in the day, because it was one of my first role-playing games, so I was not playing right. It took me years to start learning the actual rules for Shadowrun. So yeah, MechWarrior, it took me a long time for I actually learned the real rules behind it. So yeah, I probably said some stuff that wasn't accurate, and again, rose-tinted glasses and nostalgia filter and all that. BattleTech and Shadowrun are two of my first games. I haven't played a lot of the BattleTech role-playing game as an adult like I have Shadowrun, so I can't really say one way or the other if I'm just completely looking at it like, oh, that was so much fun back in the day, pure nostalgia joy. So take it as you will. I have looked over the new edition of the role-playing game. I really like it. I think it's a good improvement. It's not perfect. There's a lot I would have done different if I were designing it, but there's a reason why I host a podcast and write a gaming column. Those who can do, those who can't teach, and those who can't do either go into media.
All right. Well, before the break, we were talking about rifts. Do we have anything more we want to say about rifts and giant robots, or do we want to move on?
I think we've said enough about Rift.
All right, fair enough.
And before we move on to what I think is probably going to dominate the rest of the discussion, which is I think we've only got one real big mecha game left.
No,
there's still another one?
There's two left.
Two left?
Yeah.
What's the other one that besides the obvious one?
Okay, well, let me ask you, what's the obvious one?
The one that one of the two of you has worked on before.
The other one that I think is a crime if we don't talk about it is Mekton Zeta.
Oh, yeah.
Mekton in general and Mekton Zeta specifically, which also includes the Bubblegum Crisis role-playing game that they came out with.
Please start. This is one of those, oh my god, I know this, but nothing's coming to me. Please start talking about me. Tell it what it is, because it's driving me nuts.
Well, okay, I guess let's jump into Mekton Zeta. We might as well talk about it now, because we're bringing it up. So Mekton and Mekton Zeta. The Mekton is kind of like one of the early... It's a very early game. I'm not exactly sure of the earliest date when it came out. One of you guys could probably hit Wikipedia and tell me. But it came out a while ago. It's a property of R. Talsorian Games and was originally designed by Mike Pondsmith. And Mekton is an attempt to take a lot of great...
1984.
Ross? Yep, 1984. Mekton Zeta is 1994.
Yeah, so the original Mekton 10 years ago, 10 years prior to the Zeta. So 1984, that's 30 years ago. Holy crap.
God almighty.
Same year as BattleTech, for the record.
So pretty early is what we're talking about.
I got kids in my band that weren't even born when that game came out.
I was 4.
All right, so Mekton is...
Allow me to invite you to get off my lawn.
Yeah. The thing about Mekton is it tries to take a lot of the tropes and themes of anime giant robot shows of that period. So typically talking about Gundam, Pat Labor, Votoms, and tries to take those and turn them into a role-playing game. Macross is also, obviously. Yeah. Although I think they were steering a little bit towards other anime as well. Like I would argue Megazone 23 is one of their influences.
And you're right about mentioning Pat Labor, which is my favorite giant robot.
Oh man, we were gonna have a fight.
Oh my god, I love Pat Labor.
I like it too. I got into it in the mid '90s though, so I was into that '90s anime.
The robot design drives me up the fucking wall. But
I completely understand that one, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring up before we started getting to Robotech. But let's go ahead and keep talking about this game.
All right, so Mekton, specifically Mekton and Mekton Zeta. I never played Mekton, but I did play Mekton Zeta.
I think I played one game of Mekton Zeta.
So we're all not going to be experts on this one either, guys. Sorry, listeners. Sorry. We have a giant robot show, and we're like, I kind of don't know about most of these. Sorry about that.
to hell with it.
But I am a fan of Mekton. I think Mekton as an idea, as a game, is actually pretty cool. And I really think Mike deserves a lot of kudos for bringing it to market. Because I think there was a real niche there that people were looking for. They wanted to play giant robot games, giant robot RPGs. And they wanted to integrate it a lot more closely than, say, some of the things we talked about before, like, MechWarrior. I can't say a lot about Mekton, but Mekton Zeta, specifically, that book is beautiful. It's got one of the most exciting openings I've ever read. Like, whenever I think about how I wanted to write the games that I worked on, like Rogue Trader and Deathwatch and even Accursed, I would go back and look at the way that I was introduced to Mekton Zeta and try and capture some of that magic. Because my God, is it beautiful when it opens. It has this almost like it's almost scripted like a trailer for a movie, the first 10 pages. And it's giving you these little snippets of this world, of this invasion from outer space. And my God, it's gorgeous.
In a world.
Yeah, well, I don't want to ruin it for people, but if you ever get a chance to check out Mekton Zeta, look at those first 10 pages, and if you don't get a chill, I'm not sure what I can tell you because it's just great.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia page right now, and I'm seeing this one out. There was an edition called Gundam Sinki, which came out in 2000. It was a Japanese language official Mobile Suit Gundam RPG using the Mekton system. Here's what it says. Here's what it says on Wikipedia. Again, came out in 2000 in Japan. Scheduled for U.S. release. Release date unspecified at this time.
So 14 years late.
Yeah.
Well, they still might be. They still haven't quite reached Duke Nukem Forever levels, though. So.
Well, the key thing here is
that's on schedule for a Palladium product.
Well, the key thing to take away from this is Mekton is such a good game that the Gundam guys want to use it. Right?
In Japan, not just the licensor in the US. In Japan, Bandai wanted it.
So I'm just going to point out that that's kind of how awesome Mekton is. Okay. And Mekton Zeta is absolutely a love letter to mecha anime. Yeah. Now, the system is a little complex. There's an idea of these things called hits and kills, that guns do kills and you have hits. It's got a construction system, kind of like BattleTech, where it's like at a part where you build your giant robot, and then that is a complex system as well. But it does also bring in some of the stuff from Cyberpunk 2020, like the idea of like there's a stat called cool, things like that. No, it's got
Cyberpunk 2020 is a great game.
This is what I'm saying, is it's got some of the elements that made Cyberpunk a fun role-playing game as well on top of that. So I'm hesitant to play Mekton Zeta. I have a friend of mine who, a shout out to my friend Josh Dowdell, because he's just an enormous fan of Mekton Zeta. I'm a little hesitant to play it, not because of Josh, but because the system is a little on the complex side for me. But nevertheless, they have an awful lot of... Mekton Zeta was extremely well supported for coming out, at this point, 20 years ago. For a 20-year-old game, Mekton Zeta is very well supported. It has a lot of supplements. It has a lot of additions to the game. They brought in like psychic powers for pilots. So if you want to play psychic pilots, you can do that. I think I would love to see a new edition of Mekton Zeta. Like if I was king for a day, right? Like I would kickstart it. Me and Jason would kickstart it together. And we would do something, definitely more simpler, but although I would leave a lot of the robot design stuff in there so that you could make the types of robots you want to make. Like in Mekton, if you want to make a transforming robot, that's just a few selections, right? I want it to transform from X to Y, and you can work that out. And you can have all the cool stuff that giant robots have, from beam sabers to, autocannons and everything. And they have their world that they put into the core book. Actually, it has a Gundam-like, Zaku's versus Gundam's approach, which is also very, very cool. So I don't think any discussion of giant robot mecha games can go on without at least talking a little bit about Mekton Zeta.
And it's also got a lot of fan support as well. Like I said, I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page, and they're listing 5 different settings that have been designed by fans, including one for Bubblegum Crisis. So. Well,
Bubblegum Crisis actually was a published game by Artelsorian.
Right, and it's pretty good.
Well, it was a fusion game. They came out with this system called Fusion that was kind of a halfway point between the Cyberpunk 2020 and Champions. There was a game called Champions New Millennium, as a matter of fact, that was published under the Fusion system. And Fusion powered Bubblegum Crisis. It powered, I think there was another anime game as well. I can't remember the name of it. It might have been Demon City Shinjuku or something like that. But Fusion powered quite a few games of that era, and Bubblegum Crisis is one of them. And in Bubblegum Crisis, you actually play power armor characters. Again, it's a really, if you like Bubblegum Crisis, okay, kind of like, Dresden Files role-playing game is not only a good role-playing game, but it's also an awesome reference. Bubblegum Crisis is like that for fans of Bubblegum Crisis. The RPG is a beautiful thing to have and own, just if you love Bubblegum and you don't really care about role-playing, it's still awesome to own it.
By the way, the anime series that you're having trouble thinking of was just Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, okay.
For
there you
record.
Go. So there's that. And unless you guys have anything else to say about Mekton Zeta, I think we might be able to.
No, but one thing you've been... Well, Jason, did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, not really.
Because one thing you've been talking about with Mekton Zeta, and one thing I think we should really touch on before we close out by talking about Robotech, is one thing we've been bringing up a lot is design of mechs. And that's... I don't know about you guys, but that's probably one of the things that drew me to the genre so much was, like I said, getting those technical readouts from BattleTech and just looking through them and looking at all those sketches and designs and reading all the sci-fi tech behind it and talking about Myanmar armor and the fusion engines that are going into it and how everything's powered and everything works and the neuro helmets and, again, just those drawings, those designs that looked so cool.
It's like being a car nerd. For nerds, if you're a car guy and you love talking about your V8 engine and how all the manifolds work and you're really into the whole tech of your car, right? That's like nerds and giant robots, because we love to talk about the sensor systems and the power and even how like the pilot interfaces, with his mech and stuff.
That brings up an interesting question. I think we need to ask Total Fangirl what she thinks about mecha games.
Oh yeah,
she's a car person.
Yeah.
Personally, you're talking about that sort of love of the technology. My love of giant robots and powered armor, because I do really love powered armor, really sort of comes from the same place my love of cars and motorcycles and aircraft come from. I mean, I can sit and read technical write-ups on aircraft all day. I collect and restore antique Japanese motorcycles. I do all my own work on all my cars. I love knowing how these machines work and having this is going to sound weird, having this friendship with these machines. They have distinct personalities, not in a...
I don't know about cars per se, because I don't drive, I'm not a car person, but I am a computer guy. I do software QA as my day job. Uh-huh. I completely see what you're saying. Every computer, you can have the exact same parts from the exact same manufacturers and the exact same operating system and the exact same software, and the two computers act completely differently.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is why guys name their cars.
I don't name cars.
Well, but some guys do.
I name computers.
Like,
but I have to for the network.
You could call your car Lola, or you could call your car, like, in a lot of our pop culture, there's people with cars that have names.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's a thing in our culture, especially for guys, I would say, where we just love machines and sometimes anthropomorphize them a little bit by giving them a name and a personality and sort of identifying with them.
Right. Hey Daryl, what's your computer? What's your computer's name right now?
My laptop is named Mouse. My desktop is named Ivy. My Linux box is Bob.
Okay.
Trying to remember. I've got another computer named Butters, but I can't remember which one that is. I think you're kind of getting my naming trend at this point. It's all Dresden Files characters. My
PC, which I'm on right now, is Alexandra Feodorovna. She was the last Tsarevna of Russia. She was Tsar Alexander's. And then all my hard drives are named after her children. My laptop, I have a laptop that's Betty. I have another machine around here that's Veronica. And then my iPod is Anichka.
And nice. For the record, my Wi-Fi network is Paranet. My rig for recording this show is named Mac, after McAnally. And my Roomba is named Toot.
My Wi-Fi is Yo-Yo-Darn.
So this is just to show that, giant robots... Well, giant robots and nerds go really well together because it gives us that sort of ideal of there being sort of a spirit or a anthropomorphism to a giant robot where it's not just a piece of machinery, it's almost like a person in some ways.
I know, I think Ross, you've seen Master and Commander.
Yeah.
Have you seen Master and Commander, Daryl?
I have not.
Okay, I highly recommend it. I'm a huge Patrick O'Brien nerd. I'm a huge Age of Sail, sailing nerd. Mm-hmm. There's a scene in Master and Commander where Russell Crowe, who's playing Captain Aubrey, talks about Surprise, his ship. And you see how in love he is with this ship. And she's just wood and cloth and bolts, right? But it's his home, it's his livelihood, it's his everything. And there's this great attachment he has to it. And,
Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon. Yeah.
Captain Jack Sparrow and the Black Pearl. Not as much. Kirk and the Enterprise.
There you go. That's a better comparison. Yeah.
So that's pretty much I just love looking at the tech and thinking about just looking at the designs. You can see the personality behind the mech, even if it's just an inanimate object.
Well, I'm going to say beyond the technology, I think there's even kind of an aspect of superhumanism. It's like, one of the things I love playing about, playing a superhero is feeling more than human, larger than life. And giant robots give you that sense of, by proxy, I am huge, I am powerful, I am a force to be reckoned with. Right? It is directly amplifying your presence.
I can use a battleship as a baseball bat.
Yeah, it's directly amplifying your presence on a very visceral level, and that's another thing that's really kind of awesome about giant robots and power armor is you can do what you can do as a man, but you can do it so much more.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
That's going to bring it around to your Ballywhack. Why don't you tell us?
Bailiwick.
Why don't you tell us about Robotech?
When I came to Robotech as a property, Robotech had a really big influence on me as a kid. I watched a lot of Robotech when I was little. Really sort of influenced my, it was my first giant robot show. It made me really love giant robots. It sort of informed a lot of my writing, after that, even as an adult. When you talk about Robotech, you're talking about three very specific settings that, Carl Macek sort of bodged together and then tried to iron out all the wrinkles.
Well, you're talking about actually 5 settings.
I'm talking about 3. Macross, Southern Cross. Those are the ones that exist now.
Well, okay. Look, for the listeners, though, there are 5 separate Robotech settings. There's Sentinels.
What are the other 2? Oh, Sentinels doesn't exist anymore.
Well, hang on. From the standpoint of a role-playing game with giant robots, there are 5 separate Robotech
Sorry,
settings.
I was thinking current canon.
Well, that's why I had to jump in there.
Okay. Listeners, let me warn you right now. Ross and I are going to fight about Robotech for the next 30 minutes.
Okay, so from the standpoint of a Robotech RPG about playing giant robots, there's 5 settings. There's Macross, Southern Cross, 3rd generation. I know you're going to call it most beta. 3rd generation, Sentinels, and Shadow Chronicles.
Right.
Is that, am I right or wrong?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Correct.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Robotech, the cartoon, and then its sort of component pieces, Macross, Southern Cross, and Mospeada are all very character-driven. And I think a lot of anime is very character-driven. At least I'm not a huge anime fan, and I'm not very experienced with a lot of anime, but the stuff that I've watched and the stuff that I like tends to be very character-driven. So I think, Robotech lends itself very well to being a role-playing game. Because not only are you playing the pilot of an F-14 that turns into a giant robot and punches giant aliens in the face, or, a hover tank driver, in post-apocalyptic Earth, or, a dude rolling essentially a Buell Ulysses that turns into a suit of powered armor, there are these great arcs of character development within the stories, the canon stories from the cartoon. I think Robotech makes an excellent role-playing game experience because of that. It's almost like the giant robot stuff, like the mecha stuff is secondary to the character development within that property.
Well, to be clear, you're talking about your vision of what Robotech is. I would argue that the role-playing games themselves present a slightly different view. I would argue, for example, that if you picked up Macross and read it, it would tell you what it's about is giant robots in the military, and it's about military missions You know, you and I are on a team of guys who pilot giant robots, and we are assigned, you know, what we're doing in that world is we're assigned a mission to undertake.
Right. Well, the question you asked was, what makes it a good role-playing game?
Well, that's close enough. I guess this has always been one of my criticisms of Robotech as a role-playing game, is that it's always felt to me like one of Palladium's earlier games, Recon, which was very much just like you are a bunch of guys in a war.
Yeah.
And it always felt to me like Recon with giant robots added in. They didn't really change, in my opinion, they didn't change the thrust of the game to fit the source material. Mm-hmm. They just kind of layered that on top. And what you're describing, I agree, sounds, you know, much closer to the source material. Sounds like something that's more what I would want to play. And
it's more of what I tried to do when I was doing Robotech. You know, I tried to really, I like Valkyries a lot. And I'm like, a lot. And I like Mecha a lot. But, you know, I really would rather hear about, you know, I'd rather hear about Ben Dixon.
Yeah. There's some great characters in Robotech. I think we can agree on that.
Yeah.
Sure. And, you know, like if you were going to say what Macross was about as a role-playing game, I think you would give us a different description than what we would get out of reading the RPG, right? If you were going to say the same thing about even Southern Cross, the one game I think that comes closest to replicating the source material as far as like what it's about is probably third generation / most beta. Mm-hmm. Do you want to have anything to say about that?
I you know what? I haven't read Irvin's most beta book. I've read that's the new one. I've read the old one, and there's not much to it.
Okay, but I think from the examples that they show in there, and I think from the adventures that are part of that, they're showing you like how to, you know, what you're supposed to be doing is a lot closer to that source material. That's at least the feel that I got. Let's put that. Sure. Which again, there's nothing really wrong with playing a military game. I don't think there's no reason why that can't be fun to play. Just like we're all military guys doing stuff. So Jason, I think, you know, what you're describing as how to play Robotech, that is kind of awesome to me. I would love to play in a game of Robotech where you're the GM. If you have. Yeah, I have actually, but I'd like to play like a campaign, like a really long running. I would love to develop a character like the way you seem to love developing characters.
Right.
Tell us like I know you've got some great adventures, for example, for Macross in the way that you like to run it. So why don't you give us some idea of the way you like to present what Robotech is about as a GM?
Okay. Let me tell you about a convention game that I run, which is the game you played in. And then let me tell you about the campaign that I would like to run.
Okay.
Which I haven't gotten to. Listeners, Ross has actually played this game at Gen Con. And I run it two different ways. I run it either in space or I run it on the ground.
And it was really fun. I should point that out.
Which one were you in space or were you on the ground? Do you remember?
I believe I was in space. I was the rookie.
You were the rookie. You guys, okay, yeah, you guys played in orbit. Basically, the game is called Housekeeping or House Cleaning, and basically it's a Zentradi and mixed Zentradi and human terrorist cell has holed up in an abandoned Zentradi cruiser, and you're part of a squadron that needs to go in there and get those assholes out of there. And it doesn't matter. I'll just tell you what happens. They get in there and they discover that everybody has smallpox because they were dicking around with the micronization chambers, and they put humans in the micronization chamber and made them giants like the Zentradi.
It's a very cool premise. If you know Robotech and you know Macross pretty well, it's like, and there's a lot of moments like that.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm not that big of a Robotech fan, and I'm still whoa.
And but they go aboard. Depending on how big the group is, it's either 4 guys in non-variable mecha, 4 guys in Spartans, and 2 guys in Valkyries, or 4 guys in Spartans and 4 guys in Valkyries. And it's a dungeon crawl. It's a dungeon crawl that gets worse and worse and more horrible for them as time goes on. When they realize that they're aboard a plague ship at this point. And so that's the con game that I run a lot. The campaign that I would really like to run, and I don't have the time or the energy to put into running a campaign right now. I want to run a campaign that's based before the Robotech cartoon starts. It's after the crash of Macross, the ship Macross, and during the rebuilding, where the players are all reporters and engineers and scientists and politicians, and they're trying to figure out what the secret behind Project Valkyrie is.
And
the
secret
secret,
be cool.
the secret behind Project Valkyrie is that it's the variable fighter.
Yeah.
Right? It's an F-14 that turns into a giant robot because the aliens that we're going to be facing are giant aliens. They're 40, 50 feet tall.
It sounds like a cool story, but I got to admit, like, if I was going to sit down with you and play Robotech, I would expect there to be giant robots at some point. So,
right.
Sooner rather than later, most likely. So,
or a test pilot game, I think would be great.
Here's that's a great, like, segue into, like, another thing I wanted to bring up. We've kind of discussed, like, all the games I can think of, unless you guys know of any others, that are RPGs that have to do with giant robots. So clearly there's people out there who are running and playing these games. Mm-hmm. And if our listeners are listening to our show, they want to listen not just to hear about these other games, I'm sure, but they want to hear about, like, what they can do to make a game like that special and memorable and cool. I'm going to throw this out to Daryl and then to Jason. What do you guys think are some ways a GM should and could use to make a game about giant robots memorable and special?
Well, the first thing that I have to say about it is, again, it goes back to all Jedi, no Jedi. Either no one can be an actual mech pilot or everyone has to be a mech pilot. That's one of the faults that I found in a lot of the published adventures for the MechWarrior role-playing game, were that a lot of them assumed that there was one or two mech pilots and the technician and support crew. Nobody wants to play the deckhand on the aircraft carrier. Everyone wants to be Maverick. So,
unless you're all playing deckhands.
If you're
the ship is on fire.
Yeah.
Well, I think Daryl's got a great point there, though. I mean,
he's absolutely correct.
You have to pick one, or you have to pick one of the other. Either everyone's a mech pilot, or no one's a mech pilot, and you're doing something completely different, but set in that universe. Like, you could do a really cool, like, espionage sort of thing, spy games, in that you're trying to steal the plans for the giant mechs, and sure, you might be able to pilot a mech, but you're not going to be as good as a dedicated pilot, but you've got all these other skills, and blah, blah, blah. That can be really, really fun. There's actually a couple of MechWarrior games that are built around that. The only problem is they kind of break down when it comes down to, okay, and now here's the mech fighting portion of it. Okay, you get to sit out and watch because you don't have a mech. And that's not any fun for the other players, and it's either everyone has to be a pilot or no one has to be a pilot. And you have to have players who are willing to create interesting characters. You can't have like in Shadowrun, you can get away with the street samurai. I have no name. I have no history. I have no family. I am just me. I am the badass samurai with the, you can pull that off in Shadowrun. You can't really do that in a game like this because the story really comes first and foremost from the characters. Otherwise, you're just playing a tactical battle game. You might as well just break out BattleTech or the Robotech tactical game that they're coming out with. You might as well just break out one of those and play a war game, because that's pretty much what you're doing unless you have people who are making interesting characters that are going to interact well.
Okay.
When it comes to the stories, my best recommendation for getting inspiration would be watch every single military TV show or movie you can get your hands on. Comedy, serious, all of them. Watch them and, like, crib left and right.
I've heard from actual people in the silent service. I've actually heard from actual submariners in the U.S. Navy that Down Periscope is the best submarine movie made. I
have heard something similar.
That's insane. That's a terrible movie.
It's terribly awesome. I happen to really like that movie, so let's put that out.
It's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. That's all I'll say.
Lieutenant Lake, you're almost out of uniform.
When I was writing Macross, I watched, as part of my research, one of the things I watched was the PBS documentary Carrier, which is 6 or 8 episodes that was filmed over a 6-month tour on USS Enterprise.
So, Jason, I think it's time for you to answer that question.
Oh, go ahead.
Memorable. How do you make a game about giant robots memorable and special?
Give the players something to play and a reason to play it.
Okay, we're done here. Thanks, everybody. I'm kidding.
Done. Yeah, my work here is done. No, I agree with everything Daryl said about compelling characters and sort of fomenting characters and teamwork and that sort of team cohesion that you need in a because you're playing a military. Well, at least if I'm talking about Robotech, you're playing on in a squadron, in a jet squadron. If I'm making a game memorable for the players, it's world building. NPCs with names that they interact with all the time. Specific officers, specific enlisted men, specific civilians that you see, specific mechanics, specific, the CAG, whoever. Just making sure that there are little bits of information in the world that make it breathe.
I had some thoughts on this. I was thinking, like, if I was going to run, and I've seriously considered running a game based on Super Robot Wars, the anime. And I was thinking, what I wanted to bring across, I think that would make the game really memorable and fun. I wanted to, number one, make sure every character, as a pilot, had something special that distinguished them from each other. Something special that they, as a pilot, had that no one else had.
That's up to the players, though.
Well, yes, but I'm saying this is one way to make it memorable, is to get that distinction between. Not only are robots different, because I want also their robots should all also have something unique. Your robot should have something it does that mine does not. I think that would be some rule that I would put down, just to kind of help make that distinction more there, right? Like in Robotech, if you're playing a VF1S as opposed to VF1J, it just means you have two head lasers more than me, right? Or less than me, whatever that is. I feel like that's not really that big a distinction. But if you're playing a Super Valkyrie and I'm playing Excalibur, for example, there is a distinct difference between what those two can do, their roles on the battlefield and whatnot. And I think it's cool. I think people want to play giant robot games. I think they want to feel special not only as themselves, but they want to think that their robot is special. So that's another thing I would suggest. And I think the one thing we brought up very early on is we talked about a lot of the tropes and themes from, early World War I fighter plane stuff would also be really cool. I would want there to be like a Red Baron pilot. I would want there to be, a code of pilots, that sort of separates them from the other guys fighting in that war, or even if it's not a war, even if it's just like we're pirates on the fringe of the galaxy. I think there would be something cool to say, well, this is something that robot pilots do, right? To have their own tradition.
Kind of like that German pilot in World War I, where he had this carrier in his sights. The thing was running on one engine out of 4, holes left and right. They could see inside the hull of it. And so he escorted him into British airspace and flew back.
World War II. Yeah.
That was 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was World War II. It was a B-17 and an FW-190,
right.
I think.
So that's what I'm saying is if you could set aside and say robot pilots have their own traditions and culture, that's another thing that would make it very cool. And the very last thing that I would put in there is, again, this is kind of like I like to look at the idea of a campaign rather than a one shot. But if I was going to run a campaign for people of giant robots, I would also have an opportunity, at least one opportunity, for technology to evolve. And what I mean by that is there would be some kind of shift in technology along the way to where your robot could change a little bit. Like you could upgrade it a little bit. You could gain something new out of it so that you feel like not only have I changed, not only has my character had an arc where he started out one way and ended up a different way, my robot has started out one way.
It's kind of the same way. If you want your character to level up, you kind of want your mech to level up too.
Yeah. And I would want it. So that's my suggestion for memorable game is unique pilots, unique pilot culture and traditions, unique robots, and then some kind of evolution technology somewhere along the line.
I'll buy that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are a GM and you want to run a giant robot game, obviously you should probably watch things like Robotech, Macross, any source material that has giant robots in it. I think Gundam 8th MS Team is one of my favorites for...
That is hands down my favorite mecha anime.
So
I've never seen a Mekton show.
You mean a Gundam show?
Or what did I say? Yeah, Mekton. A Gundam show, yeah.
Yeah, Gundam 8th MS Team has a great character-driven narrative to it.
And one of the things I really loved about it is the attention that they paid to the technology that they'd already set up in the world in the main series. Right. It's kind of like a side story of the main main Gundam follows the main story. This is like a side unit that's off on one of the, like border skirmish type things going on. It's a lot more guerrilla than just the big, huge, giant battles.
It's more small scale. It's just about, just about a couple of people rather than a huge, engagement space.
And they paid so much attention to detail, like when they make water using a coffee can and a plastic sheeting, or so that the enemy couldn't intercept, they used wired communication, even if they had to trail a wire a mile down.
Right. So and remember, this is Gundam, so radar doesn't work. So their scout vehicle actually uses sonar and basically plants a little thing in the ground, and they have guys listening to the vibrations to try and determine where the enemies are.
Wow.
It's pretty badass.
But speaking of Gundam, one thing that, I'm probably going to get shit for saying this, but this Gundam series I would actually recommend watching at least a little bit of to get the idea of what Ross is talking about with unique characters and unique mechs would be Gundam Wing. Because each of those...
I support that.
Because each of those... there are a lot of purist Gundam fans that cannot stand that show, but it has a lot of what you're talking about. Each of the 5 characters had their own distinct personalities. They had their own distinct mechs. They had their own distinct abilities. And
they had their own skills,
And neither one was technically any better than the other one on paper. It was just whether or not the pilot was any better or what situation they were in. And
like there was a pilot who was an acrobat, and there was a pilot who was an assassin, and there was a pilot who was like a scavenger, right? So they all had their own skill outside the mecha as well. Sorry, I watched a lot of Gundam Wing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just a great example of exactly what you're talking about with bringing these people together and putting them in a situation where, again, it's all pilots. They're not worried about the maintenance staff or anything like that. And there's a good plot line going on. There's actually a good deal of intrigue in the plot that they had in that show over the entire arc of the series. So it'll give you an idea of how you might want to run. And it just feels very RPG, which may be why a lot of traditional Gundam fans don't like it as much, aside from the fact that it's set in an alternate universe and all the mech pilots were by shonen and...
All right. Well, let's just say there's a lot. I mean, you could bring up issues with just about any giant robot show. I can't think of any that are perfect. But there are a lot.
Pat labor.
Oh boy. All right. I'm gonna talk about why I don't like Pat Labor's robot design.
I know why you don't like Pat labor, and you're welcome to your wrong opinion.
Okay. Pat Labor's designs irritate me because they are basically taking a police officer and making him really big. And I think they're ignoring a lot of the reasons why you would drive a giant robot, like built-in weapon systems and things like that. And it's to me, it's kind of silly to have a 38 special that's just blown up 300%. And that's basically what their robots carry. And I'm like, why don't you just build it into the arm, and that way you wouldn't have to holster it or put a speed loader in it or anything. I'm like, why?
Because it's not as awesome.
And they have, I don't know, man.
God, do I love watching an Ingram 95 run down a street and open up on a rogue mech with a riot shotgun.
Let me be clear. Let me be absolutely clear. There's nothing wrong with Pat Labor. My opinion, right? It's just my opinion. It's a subjective opinion, but my opinion is I didn't care for the robot designs, but I'm sure that there are people out there who would. And in that case, I think Jason's great it's a good idea to bring it up so that the listeners can go kind of look at it for themselves and see, if it's something they might be interested in.
The biggest problem with Pat Labor is there's too much talking.
And that's why I like it. It's because of the characters.
More
shooting. There's a whole lot of talking about our feelings in my giant robot police officer game. Man.
Okay.
Yes, I understand it's hard to be a police officer in Neo Tokyo with your giant robot.
Well, okay. Actually, in a role-playing game, though, where we were police officers and giant robots, and my Shadows Angeles setting does, in fact, have that size robots running around in the police. I think the interesting question is, what impact does that have on crime fighting, and how does that change the way that your police officers work? Mm-hmm. In Shadows Angeles, for example, they use those on demons and monsters and cyborgs and things like that. That's why they have it, is to give themselves an edge.
Well, I mean, in Pat Labor, they're fighting other labors.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Is there anything else? Let's get back to our core topic here, the giant robots in a role-playing game. Is there anything more we want to say about that before we get ourselves close to last call.
I was reminded of one other role-playing game that involves mecha.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
By all means.
Tech.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't played it yet. I haven't even read it yet.
Yeah, no, he's got a point.
Yeah, it's basically BattleTech meets Cthulhu.
Well, no, I don't think that's fair. I would actually say it's closer to Evangelion meets Cthulhu. Because they take a lot of anime, sources, like Evangelion, like Guyver, and blend it into one world with the Cthulhu mythos. Now, again, I'm not an expert. I own some of the books, but I've never played it. Let's put it that way. I gotta admit, I had some concerns about balance looking at that game. Like, if Jason's playing a Guyver or a Power Armor pilot, and I'm playing a guy driving a Evangelion, I think one of us is going to have slightly more powerful attacks than the other. Just going to put that out there.
It sounds good. It has two of my favorite things in it.
Yeah, it's basically the deep ones are starting to wake up, and we have giant robots to fight them with now.
Not that it's going to get us very far, but...
It depends.
I think Cthulhu Tech might be a lot cooler now that Pacific Rim is out and people are kind of interested in the idea of monsters and giant robots, and that's one of the few games that really blends those two together. So, Jason, is there anything else you all wanted to say about the topic of giant robots and RPGs?
I think we've covered a lot of good stuff tonight. I'm not...
Okay.
I'm not sure what else we should or could talk about.
All right. Fair enough. Well, that's gonna bring us really close to last call. And we should make sure our listeners know where they can find you on the web and what your latest things are that they should be looking for.
Oh, okay. Our faithful listeners can find us at amalgamatedfiction.com. That's the landing page for my blog, which is woefully unupdated, my Facebook page, my Twitter feed, which is also woefully unupdated, because I'm bad at social media. Aside from Accursed, the latest thing to look out for, I've got a bunch of Star Wars stuff coming out from Fantasy Flight. A bunch of books that I've worked on.
Anything you can say a title for? Or?
What is it? Sons of Fortune. The Corellian source book is coming out, and that one's really fun. Actually, my modular adventure from that book was used as a free PDF download on Fantasy Flight's website a couple weeks ago. I was pretty stoked about that. Yeah. I don't know, anything by Fantasy Flight that you see spaceships in, I've probably written the spaceships. So
You're also writing some stuff for Accursed coming up, aren't you?
I am.
I believe there's some adventures.
Oh, yeah. That's not due till the middle of March.
I think he's going to miss the deadline on that one, Ross.
No, that's not due till the middle of March.
By the time this show airs, it'll be February. So
right. Yeah, I think the deadline-ish for that was like the 16th of March.
Well,
so
let's just say that you are also working on some adventures for Accursed.
Yeah.
Even if they are backburnered at the moment.
Sorry.
It's fair. It's fine. But I think that's going to bring us to the close. The Imperial Guard are starting to close down the bar. So we want to say again, thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Gerald, is there anything else you want to say about giant robots and RPGs before we shut down?
Giant robots are awesome.
They are.
I think they're even more awesome when they are voiced by the girl who does Gladys. So there's that. All right. So that is us. That's the Gamers Tavern, and we are shutting down.